Hello again, and thank you for joining us on the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Joyce. Our producer is Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Our guest today is Neal Ferreira, a graduate of the class of 2002. Neal is a tenor, opera singer, and soloist who has been performing professionally in opera and oratorio for over 15 years. He's known for his rich and powerful voice and has appeared with numerous operas and numerous opera companies, and symphonies around the country, including the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Boston Lyric Opera, Florida Grand Opera, and Opera Colorado. He twice was named Artist of the Year by the Syracuse Opera. Not surprisingly, Neal earned a bachelor's degree in music at PC. He also minored in Black Studies, and he holds a master's degree in vocal performance from the New England Conservatory of Music. Neal is very loyal to his alma mater, returning to teach master classes and to perform as a guest artist. In fact, in late March, he gave a campus concert of English and French songs. And by the way, he is married to a friar, Devin Chase, a classmate from 2002. Welcome to the Providence College Podcast, Neal.
Hi, thank you very much for having me, Charlie.
We're fortunate to connect with you at the time this is being taped during the second week of May. From your website, which is Neal, that's Neal Ferreira.com, and elsewhere, it's really apparent that your schedule is pretty booked.
I am quite busy, and this period of 2 weeks right now is a little bit of an incubation preparatory period between my last gig and before my next gig. So I am always running from one thing to the next, and even today I had a church job this morning and I have to teach this afternoon, so you caught me at just the right time.
You know, I was going to ask you, give us a sense, at least in terms of your performance schedule, and actually elsewise, for what's upcoming this month and in June as well.
Sure. So the next thing that I have coming up, I will be playing Captain Macheath in the Beggar's Opera, which is an old opera written by John Gay in the Baroque period, that from which only the songs, the melodies of the songs remained. And Benjamin Britten, as an English composer of the 20th century, realized that into a full score of an opera. And you might know Macheath from Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill's Threepenny Opera, Mac the Knife. It's the same characters in the Beggar's Opera. Threepenny Opera is just another telling of that story. So I am playing Captain Macheath in the Beggar's Opera with Emmanuel Music in Boston. Emmanuel Music is the music program at Emmanuel Church on Newbury Street in Boston, which is a long-running, famed music program, church music program that has a history of doing operas as part of their season. And so on June 1st and 2nd, Saturday and Sunday, we will be performing the Beggar's Opera at Pickman Hall, which is at the Longy School of Music in Cambridge. So that's the next thing coming up for me. I just recently last weekend, sang Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with the Wellesley Symphony Orchestra. And prior to that, I had a handful of concerts in April. And in March, I sang the role of Tamino in The Magic Flute, which was a co-production, the Boston Symphony Orchestra and the Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra at Symphony Hall. And so that's been the last 2 to 3 months of my life, and it's quite busy. On top of that, in addition to my opera and concert work, I am also a church singer. I am a cantor at a number of different Catholic churches around the North Shore of Boston. And so I have regular church jobs that I sing every weekend and throughout the week as weddings and funerals come. And I also substitute for friends who sing in other denominations and other churches. Occasionally I sit in with the choir if they're a section leader in the choir. And I am also a music educator. I'm a voice teacher. I teach at a couple of private music studios up here on the North Shore. I have currently, right now, I believe, 18 or 19 voice students whom I see once a week. And I also teach preschool music at a Montessori school in Newburyport, Massachusetts, which is the preschool that my children went to when my children were in preschool, and they needed a music teacher and we needed a preschool. And so I did Montessori music training, and we arranged to barter in part for my children's tuition there. And so my children have all gone through the schools. All three of my kids went through Newburyport Montessori School, and I loved it so much. And I love working with little kids and singing songs and playing silly games that I decided to stay on after my kids finished preschool. So I also teach there one day a week. So my schedule is often takes a lot of juggling.
I can understand after listening to that, sure. Are there actually any slow or more moderate periods for you?
The summer is usually a good downtime for me. My wife is a farmer. Devin is a farmer, and her busy season is in the summertime. So when she's working 50, 60 hours a week, I'm generally home with the children. I'm number one dad. And also a few of my school jobs really step back in the summertime. I don't teach at the preschool in the summer. A number of my voice students take the summers off, so I condense my teaching schedule. And it's a much lighter period for me. And I have done a handful of opera festivals. Most of the opera companies, their seasons run about the school year, September to May, and the summertime is reserved for festival type companies, summer stock, if you will. And I have done a few of those, but it's not a regular thing for me. So usually during the summer, I don't really have any opera jobs, and I get to be home with the kids. Actually, last year was an exception to that. I did go out and perform at Tanglewood with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I did a concert performance of La Boheme with BSO at Tanglewood, which was really just wonderful. And actually, I was lucky because one of my sons, my middle son, got to come out to Tanglewood with me and stay in the hotel with me and come to rehearsals with me. He's a real classical music buff, and he plays a few instruments himself, so it was a treat for him to sit into the Boston Symphony Orchestra rehearsals. But we also spent a lot of time hiking and swimming and just enjoying the Berkshires. So, as I said, I usually don't work very much in the summer in the opera world, but last summer was a great treat. That was almost a working vacation.
That sounds like it was fun indeed. And I don't imagine that Tanglewood is an atmosphere that you sing in quite often. What was that? Was that your first time, or was that experience unique?
It was my first time working at Tanglewood. It was my first time even visiting Tanglewood. I'd been out to the Berkshires before, but had never had the opportunity to see anything at Tanglewood. And it was not my first time working with the BSO. I had worked with the BSO in Symphony Hall a few years ago, but it was. I mean, Tanglewood is just idyllic. It's a beautiful place, set in a beautiful place, and Lenox and that whole area, the pace of life is just a little bit slower in the summertime, and it's very relaxed and easygoing, and it's amazing to be surrounded by so much incredible music making happening all the time, whether it's the BSO working on the concerts for the upcoming weekends, performances, or the guest artists who rotate through the various venues at Tanglewood, or the Pops does concerts at Tanglewood, and the Boston University Tanglewood Institute is out there, and so all the students at the BUTI are performing regularly. So there's so much music making happening all the time. It's a pretty incredible place to be. Even for the 1 week that I was there last summer, I think we saw 6 concerts. And we also got to go and see, Shakespeare and Company and some other performances too. So it's a pretty incredible place. I definitely plan to go back, and I think I will take both of my sons this year out to Tanglewood, because I know the Pops or maybe it's the BSO, is doing a screening of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, and they'll play the movie on the big screen, and the orchestra will play the score to the movie live. And my kids are really into Star Wars, as am I, so it'll be fun to go and see that.
And how much would you say wise, roughly, Neal, would your performance work be done in Boston or nearby?
Well, I'm lucky because living in the Boston area, there are so many musical organizations in Boston that do great work. So obviously, I did my master's degree in Boston at New England Conservatory, and have developed relationships with many of the musical organizations in Boston. So at this time in my life, I would say that, insofar as my opera career goes, maybe 80% of my work is in the Boston area, which is really nice because I get to live at home and work close to home and work with friends and other people from the local scene. And my friends and family who are local can come and see me perform regularly. So working close to home and doing good, high quality work in Boston is really, really nice. Um, Previously, in I say my last career, I was singing a different, I guess, class of repertoire, and had a different agent than I do now, and was doing quite a bit more traveling around the country to different opera companies. And at that time, I would say, I was probably doing more work out of town than in town. But that is that's an almost a different skill, because you're living out of a suitcase in a hotel. You're always traveling. You have to stay well amid all that travel and being exposed to new people and new places and new environmental influences. And I do a fair bit of traveling now, but not quite as much as I did, let's say, 5, 6, 8 years ago.
You mentioned the word repertoire, and one of the things I think that's most impressive about you is the breadth and the diversity of your singing. And it's, of course, not just confined to operas. You sing pieces ranging from Mozart and Beethoven to contemporary compositions, including world premieres.
Sure.
Talk to us, Neal, about that variety and the versatility you need to have as an opera singer.
Well, particularly in today's opera world, being versatile is extremely important. The opera as an art form has always been, throughout history. I think sometimes people who don't know opera look at opera and think it's a real old stuffy thing, but the operas that we love to sing from Mozart and Verdi are were at the time the people's entertainment. They were written for the common people to enjoy, and they were obviously so good that they stood the test of time, and we still perform them today. But there are many, many operas and many, many composers being written all the time, and I think certainly for an American audience, it's amazing that we have so many American opera composers writing operas in English about current stories and current events to a current audience, that they, with I would say, a current sonic texture, that we're constantly being exposed to new stories and new operas. And so I think both as singers and as audience members, we're lucky that we have this ever-evolving art form to continue experiencing new things. And 20th century, 21st century opera often has a number of different difficulties and skills that you wouldn't necessarily tackle in Mozart. I would say, with with Mozart and Donizetti and Rossini and older composers, obviously the voice and the singing are paramount, and it certainly takes being a good and intelligent musician to be able to perform those things. But nowadays, the rhythmic structure and the harmonic structure of the operas that are being written tend to be much more, I would say, varied and difficult than something that was written during the classical or romantic period. So you have to be not just a good singer, but also a good intellectual musician. And so that's something I feel like I've always prided myself on, as being a smart musician. I didn't start as a singer. I started as a clarinet player when I was in school, and so uh, learned all about music, playing the clarinet and the saxophone, and I've been lucky to be able to apply those skills to my singing. I also didn't really when I started singing, did not start singing classical music. Actually, I would say the first time I ever sang on stage was my junior year of high school. We resurrected the theater company at our high school, the drama department, that had been dormant for a long time, and we did a production of Godspell, and that was the first time I ever sang on stage, and I just fell in love with it. But I still, at that point, didn't really think that singing was going to be my life tract. I still intended to be a clarinetist, and so I started doing musical theater in high school. I went to Bishop Hendricken High School in Warwick, Rhode Island, and I did musical theater at Bishop Hendricken, and also at Bayview Academy, and with other companies around Rhode Island, and loved Broadway, loved musical theater. I was playing in the Rhode Island Youth Jazz Ensemble as a clarinet and saxophone player, and the opportunity arose for me to sing with the jazz band, and so I started doing some jazz singing with them, which even carried over into college. I sang a little bit with some jazz combos, and I did pursued musical theater in college at PC, and I was a member and eventually the music director of Special Guest, which is an a cappella group at PC, which started during my time or slightly before my time there. I joined, I believe, Special Guest in its third year of existence, and I loved all of it. I really felt like I came around to classical music late because I loved singing everything. And actually, I did not really intend to, like I said, to pursue classical singing as a career until late in my college career. I really intended, after school to either move to New York and try to be on Broadway, or perhaps make a go of it as a semi-professional a cappella singer, or even to pursue choral singing at a professional level, which at the time I didn't really realize was as much of a possibility as it really was. However, the more I studied singing in college, the more it became apparent that my voice had a classical leaning, and my voice teacher kept encouraging me, "You should be an opera singer, you should sing this kind of music, go and pursue it." And so eventually I came around to it, and started to, I took a year off after undergrad and went to graduate school and really delved deeply into studying classical music and classical singing. And so I would say that most of my professional work, I sing opera, I sing classical music. However, I often do sing choral music professionally, and I love to sing all kinds of music. I tend to do a lot of folk music with some friends who perform that style of music. Occasionally I'll sit in with them or their band. I obviously sing lots of different contemporary styles in my church work. I love gospel music. I still love jazz, though I don't really feel like I get as much of a chance to sing it as I used to. Occasionally I'll get the chance to do musical theater. Actually, I will. Opera companies nowadays in the United States are doing a lot more musical theater. Most opera companies are scheduling, maybe one musical, one classic Broadway musical on their season. So I've even gotten to do musicals with opera companies. I did Annie Get Your Gun with the Glimmerglass Festival with Deborah Voigt, who's a very famous opera soprano, in the lead role of Annie, and that was a really fun experience. So, yeah, while I do sing mostly classical music, I try to be varied in my approach, just because I love all kinds of music, but I also feel like my experience of performing different styles of music help to inform the way I approach my singing when it comes to, something more traditional like opera.
Sure, sure. And a lot of what you sing requires you to know or sing in a foreign language, Neal,
Yes.
especially operas.
Mm-hmm.
You've sung, I'm aware, at least in Italian, German, and French. Do
Mm-hmm.
you find singing in a foreign language challenging? And do you need to have command in every particular language?
Well, you do need to certainly have some degree of command. I I do find occasionally singing in foreign languages challenging, in that if it's not your first language, if it's not your native language, sometimes the inflection of a word or the subtle meaning of a turn of phrase doesn't immediately hit home the way that it would if I was singing in my native language, in English. However, I've been at this now for a long time, so when I was growing up, my mother's family is French, and so I learned bits of French from my grandmother. We learned our prayers in French, that kind of thing. I studied French throughout high school, and so I've always felt very much at home in the French language as well. And so singing in French, while it takes kind of a little bit of a different approach to your vowels, is something that I felt like came somewhat easily to me. I had not studied Italian or German at all prior to learning to sing it. When I was in undergraduate, my teacher would give me a German song to sing or an Italian song to sing, and he would speak me through through the words, word by word, and I would write down in the music exactly what it sounded like to my ear, so that I could get the sense of, how do I pronounce this word the way it's supposed to be pronounced in a way that I can understand. And so throughout undergrad, that was the way that I approached singing in a foreign language. I would learn how to say the words, and then I would translate the words. I'd either find a translation that I could use, or I would use a dictionary to translate that text. And so when I went to graduate school, unfortunately, at NEC, the graduates at that time were not allowed to take conversational foreign language. We were only allowed to take foreign language diction as it relates to singing. I believe they left the conversational classes for the undergrads. So in grad school, I took diction, which covered pronunciation for French, Italian, German, and Latin. And in that, I learned the International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA, which gives you the symbols and the tools to be able to look at a word and the way that a word is pronounced, and learn the rules about how words are pronounced in that language, and then be able to say them as I should. But insofar as the meaning and the text, I have always been translating. My dictionaries, my Italian, French, and German dictionaries are well worn and tattered, and I still use them on a very regular basis. When I have to sing a new role, I'll say I've got a new role coming up. I will take the score, and the first thing I'll do is I'll take out my Italian dictionary, and I'll go through and I'll translate everything as much as I can. And then if there are things that I don't know, I will call up friends who are better Italian speakers than I am, and I'll ask them, okay, well, this word in this context, what does that mean? Then I will try to go and find a full translation if it's out there. There's a there was a professor at Juilliard named Nico Costel, who was a very fine tenor who sang at the Met for a long time, and before he went on to teach. And he translated and did the International Phonetic Alphabet for many, many, many operas, and all those translations are published and found in a lot of music libraries. And so I'll sometimes I'll go and I'll look at the Nico Castells, and he'll give you not just the translation, but also those kinds of folkisms and colloquialisms that you wouldn't know, not being a native Italian speaker. And so I have learned Italian and German to a point by translating for since I graduated from New England Conservatory in 2005. So since about 2003, I've been actively translating in Italian, French, and German, and I've learned those languages fairly well from that practice. In fact, I like I said, I would feel comfortable speaking with someone in French, but Italian or German, I wouldn't necessarily. I'd feel awkward, just because I never really took those conversational classes, and that's still something that I'd like to do. But my verb conjugation is leaves something to be desired. However, I was at a dinner with some castmates and colleagues from a show that I was doing, and the conductor is Italian, and the lead was from Georgia in Europe, and so she spoke primarily Russian, but the two of them could speak Italian to one another, and so we were at this dinner, and they were speaking in Italian, and I stepped back and listened for a second. I said, "Oh my gosh, I understand about 90% of what they're saying," and was able to really, without even thinking about it, intuitively process that. So that made me feel really good. I said, I guess I really do know Italian. So yeah, so but I try when I sing in a foreign language to really pay attention to what I'm saying, to make sure that what I'm communicating is true to the text, and it's a little bit harder when it's not in your native language, but it's still the goal. I don't want to be a singer who sings words that they don't know what they mean. That's not what it's about. Our job as a singer, as an actor, is to communicate, and we really need to know the ins and outs of exactly what we're saying so that we can communicate effectively. I've not really. I mean, I have done a little bit of work in Russian. I've sung a couple of arias in Russian, but I just received an offer for my first opera in Russian in a couple of years, and so that will take some doing, because that again is another set of sounds and even another alphabet that I'm not used to. So I have a friend and a few friends who are Russian speakers and Russian coaches that I will work with in helping to prepare that score.
Wow, that's another stretch point for you, Neal. No question about
Indeed.
it. I wanted to ask you, for those unfamiliar with the opera, there's actually a lot of role-playing, really acting that takes place. Talk to us about the acting side of singing and maybe some of the roles that you've had.
Sure. Well, I actually started my performing career as an actor. When like I said, my first show was Godspell, and then I did a few other shows throughout high school. And then when I got to college, I did some work with the theater department at PC with John Garrity and Mary Farrell, and did a lot of straight plays, both on stage and behind the scenes. And then living in Providence, I started to branch out and work with some other acting theater groups around town. I worked with the Sandra Feinstein Gam Theater multiple times. I worked with Perishable Theater and the students from the Trinity Rep Conservatory, and did a fair bit of professional acting around Providence. And so when I decided ultimately to make singing and opera singing in particular my my focus, I approached it as an actor first. Whenever I play a character, I always try to come at that character from an actor's perspective. And it's funny because one of the reasons that I guess it took me so long to come around to opera was that I had a lot of, I guess prejudices about opera. I thought, that's not real acting. That's not really, I don't want to do that because I'm an actor. Opera's not real acting. And my voice teacher at PC, David Harper, said, you're mistaken in that. And my junior year of college, he said, okay, well, I have these tickets to go see an opera at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And I can't go. So your assignment is take these tickets and go to New York and see this opera. And I went, and the performance was Così fan tutte, and I think I was in the 15th row orchestra, and I was awestruck. It was, here were these people on stage singing this incredibly gorgeous music, but honestly acting, honestly telling a story, and I was just totally wrapped. And so at that point, I said, you know what? I guess opera really is real acting too. And so that was kind of the turning point for me that helped me make the decision to focus on my singing and focus on opera. But yeah, I said to you before, a lot of people think of opera, we call it in the business park and bark, where you find your place on stage and you stand there and you sing and you're kind of like a wooden statue. And then when you're done singing, then you can move around and then you find your place and you stand and you sing again and, you park and you bark. Well, that era of opera performance is really in the past. And nowadays, particularly with things like the Metropolitan Opera in HD, where people can see opera being performed close up, from the camera's perspective, but also, as in the TV and movie culture, opera has developed with that as well, and the acting is while singing is paramount to opera and to the success of opera, acting is a much bigger part of the performance aspect of it than it used to be. So when I approach a role, obviously I'm going to learn before I start rehearsals. I'm going to learn all my music. I'm going to learn everything that I have to sing. But as an actor, I'm also going to really try to do my homework from the character's perspective. If that show that I'm like the Beggar's Opera, I'll go I'll go back and I'll do my text research, find out where this story comes from. What are the other iterations of this story? How does this character, change in the different tellings of this story? And if there's a book that goes that the was source material for the opera, I want to read that book. I want to get to know these characters outside of the play. And Actually, I just did a really wonderful opera in January with the Boston Modern Orchestra project called Haroun in the Sea of Stories, which is based on a Salman Rushdie book. And I loved reading that book. And that research helped me to bring a totally different perspective to my performance of the role that I was playing, because it's obviously in opera you can't include everything from a 300-400 page book. You've got to trim, and you've only got so much text that you can use. So having that context and that subtext, even when I'm performing, of what happened in the book in between this scene, really gives me more to play on with my character. So I and when I'm on stage, when it's the time to perform, I feel like all my technical work as a singer I do before I get to that point. So the singing is in my body. And so when I'm performing, I really try to perform from the character's perspective, find my emotional connection to what that character is going through, how would my character approach the conflict? How would my character approach his relationships with the other characters? And in the moment of being on stage, in a live performance, I think much more about those things than I do necessarily about the singing, because the singing is certainly part of it, but that's something, like I said, you try to build that muscle memory into your body. And when you let the emotion of the character and of the words that you're saying come to the forefront, the singing almost just takes care of itself.
It's very apparent that you're very thorough and you have a commitment to excellence in all that you do in your career and otherwise, Neal.
Thank you.
And that extends to improving your own singing, which obviously is outstanding. But in the vein, maybe more of professional development, I'll call it. You take instruction with a world-renowned tenor, Frank Lopato.
I do.
How does that association work, and how does it benefit you?
Well, I feel like we as singers, as musicians, even as people, our development is never done. We try to always improve. There's always more that we can learn. There's always more work that we can do to become a better artist. And I have had Frank is my fourth primary voice teacher in my life, and he is a wonderful person and an incredible artist. And I see him. I wish I got to see him more. He lives in New York. He lives actually on Long Island, and I see him in New York City. And myself living north of Boston, it takes time to travel back and forth. And so when I've got something coming up and I'm preparing for something, I'll go down sometimes once a week to see him, sometimes every other week. In the off season, or actually in my busy season, when I'm working a lot and I've got a number of things on my plate, I'll go down less. Maybe I'll try to see him, once a month, just to check in and make sure things are lined up and, go back to work. But my relationship and my work with Frank has really helped me to take the next step as an artist. I think for a long time, because I felt like I came around to singing late. I felt like I was always trying to figure out my singing from an intellectual perspective. It's like a math problem. If I can do this and do this and do this and do this, then I can put all those things together and then boom, I've got good singing. And I would always, I feel like, try many, many, many different approaches, many different techniques to get at that, how to solve that problem. And what my work with Frank has helped me to learn is that technique and singing technique is about learning how to consistently do the same things over and over again so that you can rely on them. Your voice wants consistent messages, and when you give your voice consistent messages, it will give you a consistent result. And so Frank has helped me to find that consistency in my singing and my consistency in my approach, which allows me then to find the core of my voice that I can then bring to everything that I approach, rather than feeling like my voice only responds to the music that I'm singing because of the way that the music that I'm singing is written, and then my voice is going to respond differently to something else based upon the way that that's written. I now look at it from the perspective of, I know my voice, I know my technique, and I want to bring my voice and my technique and my approach to everything that I sing so that I can, like I said, find and feel comfortable and supported by and confident in that consistency of approach. And so Frank, obviously from his 40-year career on all the biggest stages in the world, singing all the great roles and roles obviously that I would like to sing in my career, he's able to pass on to me his knowledge that he's gained from the experiences of, oh, no, you need a breath here, or you need to take, come back a little bit in this phrase because you've got this coming up next, that kind of thing, that he knows just from his life and his experience, that is so valuable to me as someone who's just coming up and just undertaking these roles for the first time. So I think while I consider myself an artist, I also am at the same time a student. I'm a student of the art form, and I'm a student of music, and I love my relationship with my teacher, and will there are some singers who don't have regular teachers who said, I've went to school for this and did this, as a profession. I learned how to do this. I can teach myself, and I definitely believe that there's something to that, and I feel like we all have that job of teaching ourselves. But most singers I know, most professional singers, have a master teacher that they go back to on a regular basis to check in with, to kind of get, like I said, realigned, almost as if you would go to your chiropractor to realign your posture, even though you know what your good habits are and your good posture, or your yoga teacher. You want to check in with those, with another set of eyes, another set of ears, who can help you to see what you're doing and to hear what you're doing, and to line up your approach.
Neal, let's return to your college days, and in this
Sure.
same concept of influence. How influential was your PC experience, academically, performance-wise, as you look back now, ultimately in your career?
I think it was very influential because it was the time at which I was able to try many things and to experience a number of different avenues and options, and lay the groundwork for who I am as a musician, who I am as an artist. Um, I thought a lot about going to a conservatory for undergraduate. Like I said, I was a clarinet player and was very serious about studying the clarinet in college. And I even applied to Berklee School of Music and thought about going to college just for music, just for clarinet. And uh, ultimately, I decided that I wanted to go to a liberal arts college because I wanted to have the option to pursue other things that interested me. And in that regard, I was really thankful to be at Providence College because I studied philosophy, and with all the fantastic philosophy professors at PC, and took a number of philosophy classes. I actually found I really enjoyed anthropology and took a number of anthropology classes. I, through philosophy and anthropology and sociology, found my way into Black Studies and became a Black Studies minor. And so I was able to be exposed to and experience a number of different academic studies at a liberal arts school that I wouldn't have gotten somewhere else. And so, because I didn't start, studying singing until I got to college, my very first voice lesson was when I started my freshman year at PC. Um, and I was still playing the clarinet very actively. I felt like I had a very varied experience in the music that I was performing too. I played clarinet in the pep band and in the concert band. I played bass clarinet in that, and did that all through my 4 years of college. And I sang in the concert chorale, which is the big chorus, and I sang in E cantori, which is the select chorus, and really developed a love for choral music that stays with me to this day. I love to listen to good choral singing and beautiful choral music. And as I said, I was a member of Special Guest, and in learning a cappella and the a cappella style, we performed all kinds of music, from rock, pop, R&B, hip hop, to musical theater and other things like that. That really gave me the experience of singing things outside of the classical realm. And I obviously spoke about that I did a lot of musical theater too, and I did musical theater at Providence College as well. So my experience at PC was very varied and helped shape who I am, as a musician, very much so. Also, my relationships with my teachers at Providence was very important to me. My voice teacher, David Harper, was and still remains a big mentor for me, and I cherish that relationship that I had with him during my time there. Also, the director of choral activities at PC when I was there was Dr. Michelle Holt, who was also a mentor for me in music and in life. And she was actually the person who suggested to me at my PC clarinet audition that I consider pursuing singing. And so, if that had not been suggested to me then, who knows kind of what track my life would have taken. And I studied music education with her. I studied conducting with her, and we became friends, and that's something I think that was very important to me then, and has stayed with me throughout my life and career. Unfortunately, very sadly, Dr. Holt passed away this past year, and so it was I think difficult for all of us that were close to her then at PC, and I was grateful and honored to be able to dedicate my program that I gave at PC in March to Dr. Holt's memory.
Wonderful. I mean, you obviously have taken so much from your college education and
Hmm.
utilized it in various aspects of your life. And it's really quite pronounced, I think, that you seem so at peace, both with your career and your life. You're doing a lot in a lot of different venues. You mentioned your church singing as a cantor, and you're a voice teacher. You give
Hmm.
private lessons, preschool teacher. Going forward, do you have any kind of wild dreams with your career, Neal?
Well, I have a checklist. There are places that I really want to perform. I have been lucky enough to check off a number of those places. I got to perform in Symphony Hall, and will get to perform in Symphony Hall again. And oh man, that's just one of the most beautiful places to sing in the world. I got to perform at the Hatch Shell on the Esplanade in Boston for a crowd of 10,000 plus at a summer Boston Landmarks Orchestra concert, and that was incredible. You see the sun setting over the river and the Citgo sign in the background. That was pretty awesome for me back then. I have also gotten to sing the national anthem at a number of professional sporting events. I have sung at the Garden for the Celtics, and this last year I also got to sing at Gillette for the first time for the Patriots game. That was pretty cool, singing for 70,000 people, and watching Tom Brady listen to me sing on the jumbotron. That was pretty neat, and definitely something on the to check off on my list. I think as so far as my checklist goes, Fenway Park and singing the national anthem for the Red Sox is very high up on that list. So, if anybody is listening that can help me make that contact, I would love the help there. But there are definitely other places that I dream of singing. One of those places is Carnegie Hall in New York City. Since I was in when high school, my band director always said that's the place, man. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You got to practice, practice, practice. And thankfully, God willing, I'm. It looks like I will have that opportunity in just a couple of years' time. I've been uh, close to making an agreement on that. So I'm very excited at that possibility. Also in New York, I really would love to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. I mean, I know that's kind of every American opera singer's dream, but it's the big house, it's the place. And so I hope and believe that one day I will get the chance to sing there. I'd also very much like to sing in Europe. I have sung in Europe with actually when I was at PC. The first time I went to Europe was with Dr. Holt and the Providence College choruses. We toured Germany and the Czech Republic and Hungary, singing choral music in Eastern Europe, and that was totally breathtaking, and what an experience for, especially at such a formative time in my life, to be able to travel around and see all those places and sing in all those places. But I've never performed in Europe as an opera singer, so I'd very much like to have that opportunity, whether it be in one of the famous London opera companies and theaters, or in Germany, or in Italy, or in France. Even the Opera Bastille, I think, would be an incredible place to perform. I very much Europe is one of those places that's on my checklist. So, being an opera singer is not an easy gig. I mean, I think being any sort of performing artist is not an easy thing. They say you've got to have a thick skin to deal with the rejection, and that's true. And there are going to be years when you're gangbusters busy. You can't keep up with the amount of work that you've got coming in, and you're constantly learning new music, and you're constantly traveling, you're constantly performing. And then there's going to be other years where it's just crickets, where you've got months of downtime with no engagements. And you know during those times, you have to be able to focus on your work and focus on your craft and keep your daily practice of practicing and studying and learning music and preparing for that one thing that you've got coming up, 12 months from now. So it can be very difficult. And, obviously, like you said, I teach and I sing in churches, and I do those things because I love them, but I also do them to make ends meet, because the arts in this country is not as well funded and supported as it is in other places. And as a performing artist, it can be very difficult to make a living at that. So you've got to be entrepreneurial, and you've got to find other avenues which to help support your living and your artistry. So there are times where it's hard, and I've in throughout my early years, I worked at Starbucks for a very long time. I worked at a number of restaurants. There were times when I was working, at Starbucks in the morning, and then working at a restaurant in the afternoon, and then going to rehearsals in the evening. And those days were tiring and hard work. And that was in the early days of my wife and I having children. And there's been a lot of times that I've thought about hanging it up, think about, well, what else could I do? What else could I do that would make me happy, that I could make a living at, that's not going to be as hard as this, that's not going to have so many ups and downs to it. And I think ultimately the place that I've come to on that is that I feel in my heart that I'm called to sing. I think as human beings, we have a fundamental need to hear the human voice, and we have a fundamental need to use the human voice. It was, in our history, our first instrument. Our hands and our hands and our voices were our first instruments back in the time of being, cavemen. And so I think very deep in our genetics, we have a fundamental need to hear singing. And I feel lucky and blessed that God gave me the gift of the voice that I have, and I feel, blessed that my father is a fantastic singer and passed it on to me, and I, I was given something that I feel like I am called to give back. And so I try to approach my singing as, as giving back in a way. Certainly I think when I sing at church, I look at it in that sense that, I share my gift with people to help uh, them experience, some other deeper emotion, maybe some other experience of the divine. Not to say that I'm divine, but you know what I mean. That they say singing is praying twice. I when you allow yourself to open up to that, you find you can have a very deep religious experience, both in terms of singing and in listening. So I do feel like I'm called to sing, and it is my passion, and it's also my career, and it's my work, and those things sometimes are hard to rectify. But whether it be singing opera or playing my guitar and singing to little kids, I feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. So insofar as my opera career goes, I think that I still have a lot of good years left, and I'm still learning, and I'm still getting better, and I owe it to myself and to the time and work that I've put into this to try to see it through as far as I can see it through. I still have those goals of those places that I want to perform, and until I've exhausted every effort and every avenue, I feel like I need to keep at it to try to get to those places.
Well, I tell you, it's abundantly clear, really, that you're very happy singing, and you're very good at it. Really, Neal, you're a true credit to PC and song and character, and thanks so much for being our guest today.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chris, for your work to make this happen, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on the Providence College Podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast in all the usual places: iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. If you like what you hear, please share it with others. And thanks again to our producer, Chris Judge. I'm Charlie Joyce. Until next time.